March 2nd, 1945. 24,000 feet above Magdeburg. Ober-Lieutenant Werner Schroeder, der E-30, JG-301, rolled his Messerschmitt, inverted, felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful pass. Pieces of B-17 tumbling past his canopy like autumn leaves in a steel wind. The contrails behind him stretched like chalk lines across the frozen German sky. Below, the industrial haze of the Saxon heartland spread toward the horizon. Factory smokestacks threading gray columns into the winter air. His engine roared with mechanical precision. His hands moved with the confidence of 200 combat hours. Then he saw it. A shadow in his rearview mirror. A silhouette he recognized instantly. The distinctive squared wingtips. The bubble canopy catching the pale March sun. A P-51D Mustang closing from his 7 o'clock. Perhaps 800 meters and gaining. Schroeder's lips curled beneath his oxygen mask. He had fought American fighters before. He had survived. What he didn't know was that the next 15 seconds would teach him, sung about American firepower that no Luftwaffe briefing had ever mentioned. Schroeder had danced with Mustangs over Hanover and lived. He had evaded their fire over Brunswick and Berlin. The American pilots were aggressive. Certainly, but they were imprecise. They sprayed ammunition from excessive range, long, undisciplined bursts that exhausted their guns while German pilots twisted through the tracers and escaped. His Bf 109 G14 was lighter than the Mustang. Its instantaneous turn rate was superior. A hard chandelle into the vertical, a few snap rolls to spoil the American's aim, and the enemy would either overshoot or expend his ammunition in frustration. This was doctrine. This was experience. We were taught that the Americans were poor marksmen who wasted their ammunition in long, undisciplined bursts. Schroeder would later recall. We believed we could absorb their fire and escape. That was the doctrine. That was the lie. He pulled back on the stick and began his escape. Muscles tensed with practiced confidence. The Messerschmitt's nose came up hard. G-forces pressing Schroeder into his seat as the horizon tilted. He expected the American to fire now. A long, desperate burst from maximum range. Tracers arsing wide as he pulled away. But the Mustang held its fire. The American pilot cut inside Schroeder's turn with impossible patience, closing the distance with predatory calm. 300 meters. 250. Then silence shattered. The sound wasn't what Schroeder expected. Not the staccato rattle of a few machine guns. Something else entirely. A continuous, overwhelming roar, like canvas tearing in a hurricane. Tracers filled his entire field of vision. Not individual lines of fire, but a solid cone of destruction, a geometry he had never encountered. The first burst didn't sound like gunfire. It sounded like the sky itself was being torn apart. What Schroeder didn't know was that the P-51D carried something no German intelligence, briefing had adequately described. 18 months earlier, and 6,000 miles away, engineers at North American Aviation in Inglewood, California faced a problem that would reshape aerial combat over Europe. The P-51B was fast. It was maneuverable. Its Merlin engine gave it the range to escort bombers deep into Germany. But its 4.50 caliber machine guns, mounted at angles within the wing, jammed with frustrating regularity during high-G combat maneuvers. Pilots reported guns falling silent at the critical moment, ammunition belts twisting under gravitational stress. Chief designer Edgar Schmude and his team understood that air combat was evolving. The age of individual dueling, night against night, was ending. Industrial scale destruction demanded industrial scale solutions. The goal was no longer to outfly the enemy. It was to create a weapon system where a single burst could statistically guarantee destruction. The D model's redesigned wing solved the problem. 6 guns instead of 4. 3 per wing. Mounted upright with improved feed mechanisms that virtually eliminated jamming. The ammunition capacity increased to 180 rounds. We weren't building a dueling pistol, Schmude later remarked. We were building a shotgun, and we wanted to ensure every pellet reached the target. Chief Test Pilot Bob Chilton flew the first armed D model trials in late 1943. His report was succinct. It's not a fighter anymore. It's a flying battery. The mathematics of the P-51D's armament were devastating in their simplicity. 6 A&M2 Browning, 50 caliber machine guns, each firing between 750 and 850 rounds per minute. Combined rate of fire at approximately 800 rounds per minute. 80 rounds per second. In a theoretical 15-second burst, longer than any combat engagement required. 200 rounds of half-inch steel would leave those 6 barrels. Each M2 projectile weighed 1.8 ounces and traveled at 910 feet per second. At that velocity, a single round carried enough kinetic energy to penetrate an engine block, sever a wing spar, or kill a pilot through armored glass. The guns were harmonized to converge at 300 yards, creating a concentration of fire roughly 6 feet in diameter, the size of a dining room table. At convergence range, any target occupying that kill zone faced not one stream of bullets, but 6 overlapping rivers of destruction. Compare this to Schroeder's Bf-109G-14A, 130mm Mk-108 cannon with 65 rounds at 600 rounds per minute, and 213mm MG-131s with 300 rounds each at 900 rounds per minute. Higher caliber, yes. Greater destructive power per individual round, but far less total volume of fire, and far more demanding accuracy requirements. The geometry of death was simple at 300 yards. 6 streams of half-inch steel converged into a kill, zone the size of a dining table. Anything inside that zone didn't survive. The mathematics offered no mercy. This single specification, the 6-gun installation with solved reliability, changed the calculus of every dogfight over Europe. Back over Magdeburg, Oberleutnant Werner Schroeder was about to experience that calculus firsthand. The American pilot, First Lieutenant James, Jimmy, Harrell of the 357th Fighter Group, the Oxford Boys, had closed to 250 yards before pressing his trigger. Inside the convergence zone, point blank range by aerial combat standards, Harrell's burst lasted less than 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, approximately 160 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition crossed the space between the two aircraft. 48 of them found Schroeder's Messerschmitt. The canopy exploded inward, plexiglass shards spraying the cockpit. Rounds punched through the engine cowling, severing oil lines. The instrument panel disintegrated in a shower of glass and aluminum. His right aileron separated, tumbling away into the frozen sky. Black smoke erupted from the engine, filling the cockpit with the acrid stench of burning oil. Schroeder's hands moved by instinct. Canopy jettison, harness release. A desperate tumble into the frozen air at 24,000 feet. His parachute deployed. Behind him, the remains of his Messerschmitt spiraled toward the brown fields of Saxony. Greenhouse leader. Splash 109, pilot bailed. Harrell's wingman confirmed over the radio. Swinging back to cover the big friends. Schroeder had expected a duel. He had received an execution. Schroeder was not alone in his awakening. Across the shrinking range, German pilots were reaching the same terrible understanding. They began calling the Mustang's gun signature Der Race Wolf, the Schroeder. Combat reports from JG-27, JG-52, and JG-301 documented the psychological transformation, pilots breaking off attacks prematurely, refusing to engage escorts, fixating on the Mustang threat to the exclusion of their primary mission against the bombers. Major Gerhard Barkhorn of JG-52, credited with 301 aerial victories, observed in late 1944. We knew the Mustang was dangerous. We did not know it had become a flying firing squad. The density of fire was unlike anything we had trained to evade. From the diary of Unteroffizier Klaus Newman, JG-301, February 1945. Today I watched Hauptmann Weiss die. The American fired for perhaps 1 second. 1 second. Weiss simply came apart in the air. There was no time to react. No time to pray. General Adolf Galland, General der Jagdflieger, reflected in his 1954 memoir, The First and the Last. The Mustang's firepower was not a weapon. It was a verdict. When those 6 guns spoke, the trial was already over. The geometry of death had no loopholes. 6 barrels, 600 yards of tracers, 6 feet of convergence. The numbers were absolute. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. The 357th Fighter Group alone claimed 595.5 aerial victories during the war, the highest scoring group in the 8th Air Force, while losing 128 aircraft to all causes, a kill ratio exceeding 4-1. The average rounds expended per aerial kill dropped from over 1,500 in early 1944 with the P-51D to approximately first 100 by late 1944 with the P-51D. Fewer rounds, more kills. The reliability improvement had translated directly into lethality. German fighter pilot losses reached catastrophic levels. Luftwaffe Fighter Command lost an average of 25% of its pilots every month during the war's final year. By March 1945, the average German fighter pilot had fewer than 100 hours of total flight time. Their American opponents averaged over 300. In January 1944, defense of the Reich fighters claimed near parity with their American escorts. By January 1945, they were being slaughtered at ratios exceeding 5-1. American factories produced a new P-51D every 34 minutes. Germany couldn't replace a trained fighter pilot in 34 weeks. By war's end, 7 956 P-51D Mustangs had rolled off the production lines. Each one carried 6 guns, 80 rounds, and the industrial philosophy that would define American air power for generations. The P-51D's 6.50 calibers represented something larger than superior armament. They represented a fundamental philosophy of warfare: volume, reliability, and statistical certainty over individual brilliance. German weapons were often technically superior in isolation. The Mk108's 30 mm shells delivered devastating destruction with a single hit. The concept was elegant: 1 round, 1 kill. But elegance demanded precision. Precision demanded time, and time was the one commodity aerial combat never provided. The American approach inverted the equation. If 1 round could kill, then 80 rounds per second made that kill inevitable. The industrial mindset had been applied to the dogfight itself: mass production, not just of aircraft, but of lethality per engagement. The geometry of death favors the side that can fill the sky with steel. The P-51D proved that in warfare, the best weapon is not the one that strikes hardest. It is the one that strikes most often, most reliably, and without fail. Brilliance is mortal. Volume is inexorable. This lesson extends beyond the skies of 1945. From the A-10s, GU-8 to the doctrine of suppressive fire, American military philosophy has never forgotten what the Mustang taught. Logistics and volume defeat precision and scarcity every time. Oberleutnant Werner Schroeder, the German pilot we met over Magdeburg, survived his bailout that March morning. He landed in a frozen beet field, was sheltered briefly by a farming family, and was captured by American forces 3 weeks later as the Reich collapsed around him. He spent his post-war years as an engineer in Stuttgart, designing brake systems for Mercedes-Benz. He understood machinery. He understood precision. And he understood, with the cold clarity of a man who had faced arithmetic, he could not defeat exactly what the Americans had built. In a 1987 interview with historian Colin Heaton, Schroeder reflected on that 15 seconds above Saxony. I was a good pilot, perhaps even a very good pilot. But on that morning, I understood that skill was no longer the deciding factor. They had built a machine that could kill before I could react. 6 guns. 15 seconds. 1,200 rounds. Against those numbers, courage meant nothing. We were no longer fighting men. We were fighting mathematics, and mathematics does not negotiate. He died in Stuttgart in 1998, age 74, having outlived the machine that nearly killed him by half a century. The P-51D's 6.50 calibers hadn't just armed a fighter. They had industrialized the dogfight, and in doing so, they proved that the geometry of death favors the side that builds its equations in factories, not academies. 1,200 rounds in 15 seconds wasn't just firepower. It was a philosophy, written in steel, delivered at 2, 9, 10 feet per second, and absolutely without mercy.